Well, welcome back to the Bill Carter interview, and I have a guest today whose name is right out of the headlines. If he's not a person of interest, he's certainly an interesting person in the Trump and Russia story that is ongoing. He's also the author of many books, including a new book called Stone's Rules. This is Roger Stone. Nice to meet you, Mr. Stone.
Mr. Carter, delighted to be here.
The book, it says How to Win at Politics, Business, and Style, and those are three of the areas in the book that you talk a lot about. Whom is the book aimed at, would you say?
Well, I've been in American politics for almost 40 years. In an interview I gave to the Weekly Standard, 15 years ago, I would just spit out some of my rules. And Matt Labash, the author of that piece, which kind of became an iconic piece, said, you got to write a book about this. Then my friend Michael Smerconish from both radio and CNN has been trying to get me to write this for a long time. Essentially, these are all the little things I have learned along the way, but they're applicable outside of politics. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a conservative or a liberal. I think you could benefit and enjoy this book because the rules are generic by and large. I wanted to mix style tips, exercise tips, food tips, because all of those things are contributing to your success. It's not just, your political practices, your business practices, but the whole man, the whole person is what contributes to ultimate success, whether it's in fashion or media or politics or business.
Well, let the record show you have a nice suit, beautiful pocket, square and tie, and you're turned out almost always when I see you on TV. That's kind of your signature, right?
Look good, feel good. There's a rule in there that says if the world is a stage, always be in costume.
So I was going to say this is a heavy book because it's heavy.
Yes.
It's and the paper on it is quite.
Yes.
And was there an intention in that?
Yes. I'm hoping that people will keep this book and they will refer to it often, and therefore I expect it to become dog-eared. And I want it to last. I wanted to hold up. I was concerned that a cheaper paper over time would disintegrate. I think people will find themselves
like magazine, like a slick magazine.
I think people will refer back to it again and again if they can recall things that I said that were good for their particular situation.
Yeah. Well, I note many of the things you say in the book. One of the things. Now, I am a person who is not committed one way or the other to many things, but I'm interested in many subjects. One thing I believe in, which I don't think is in here specifically, would be what I call trustworthiness. Do you think that's important in politics?
Well, read my lips, no new taxes. If you like your insurance plan, you can keep your insurance plan. I will not send your boys off to any foreign wars. I think our leaders have consistently in politics misled us. The question is, did they think they were telling the truth at the time they said it? Interesting question. Maybe yes, maybe no. Did Roosevelt know we were going to World War II when he got reelected in 1940? He said he wouldn't take us to war, for example. So I think that, and people are rightfully skeptical about politicians and people in politics and their trustworthiness because of their actions. John McCain was an open borders man, and he opposed a border wall. As he approached his 2016 election, the polls show that he would lose a primary. He became an ardent supporter of the wall. The day after he was reelected, he changed back to his previous position. And you wonder why people are skeptical?
Yeah. Well, yes, there's nothing more, I guess, the prospect of being hanged or whatever Franklin said makes you take certain positions. So let me ask you this. Are you a trustworthy person?
I believe that I'm entirely trustworthy. Now, will I admit to being a showman, to dramatizing things? Absolutely. But dramatization is not inaccuracy. I think I'm very blunt about what I say, and often gets me into trouble. But that's just the way I am. I didn't like when I worked in Washington, I didn't like all of that brown-nosing and falseness. No, I was just never going to say George H.W. Bush was a really smart guy and would be a great president, because I never believed it. I would never say the Iraq War was a great idea, even though all my fellow Republicans were falling in line. So that phoniness about politics, that bothers me. I think people know where I stand. I'm a conservative Republican who wants to legalize marijuana and has always been an advocate for gay and lesbian rights. I think I've been pretty forthright about who I am and what I am.
Well, but in your record, you have done things that were dissembling, for sure. You've put out false people to represented them as false in campaigns and things like that.
I did that in 1972. It is a technique I learned from Bobby Kennedy, who used it extensively in his brother's campaign. I've never done anything in politics my contemporaries have not done. And I do think spinning, the Clintons are masters of this, is part of a campaign. But I've certainly never done anything illegal to further the interests of my clients.
Now, illegal brings us to what's going on now.
Yes.
Because you're in the news. I mean, there seems to be interest in you from the special counsel. At least he's questioned other subjects in this and asked them about you.
Well, am I a person of interest or an interesting person?
Yes, as I mentioned at the beginning.
Well,
yes.
It's a great line. So the point here, I guess, is first of all, this looks like a leak to me. Why would the special prosecutor leak about something like this? But let's be specific. MSNBC reports that Robert Mueller is sharply focused on my dinners with an S with Rick Gates,
right.
A low-level Trump aide who worked for Paul Manafort, Stone's meetings with Gates at Trump Tower, and points out that Stone and Gates worked together in the 80s at the firm Black, Manafort, and Stone.
Right.
I had one dinner with Mr. Gates to discuss delegates from New York to the Republican National Convention. There were 3 other people at the table. Nothing else was discussed. I don't think I've ever dined with him otherwise. I've never been alone with him. As for our meetings at Trump Tower, that would be 0. Mm-hmm. As for meetings with Mr. Gate outside Trump Tower, that would also be 0. And as for his working at Black, Manafort, and Stone, he never worked there, nor was he an intern there. So they can examine these things. I don't know Gates all that well.
Yeah.
My communications with him in 2016 are minimal, and they're innocuous. Most of them consisting of, "Hey, Rick, would you tell Manafort to please return my call?"
Well, Gates has flipped. We know he's talking to. So presumably he may be giving some information out.
Right, but
you don't know what it is.
Well, but in our legal system, one needs evidence and proof, not just allegation.
Right.
I have nothing against Mr. Gates. I just didn't have much interaction with him. He doesn't. I don't really know what he did, and he doesn't know what I did.
Beyond Gates, before Gates, there were several people who have been questioned who said they asked me about Roger Stone.
Yes.
And so that indicates the special counsel has at least made inquiries about you.
I've been a friend and political advisor for Donald Trump for almost 40 years. They also asked people about Kellyanne Conway. They asked people about Corey Lewandowski. Yeah. They asked people about anyone who was involved inside or outside, but affecting this campaign. So that they would ask about me is really not surprising.
But they've not asked to question you.
That's correct.
And does that make you think that they are not going to, or do you think you're potentially a target and they won't, and they'll just try to indict you?
I couldn't speculate, but here's one reason why they may not have called me. They've been through all of the Trump campaign emails. That's millions of emails. There is not a single email in there from me, not one. I never emailed anybody in the campaign. To the extent that I dealt with Trump's 2016 campaign, I dealt with Donald Trump. And by the way, he's not an email guy.
But you did email Nunberg and said you had dinner with Assange.
Yeah, but a 2-part joke. One needs to understand Sam Nunberg is neurotic. When he works with you, Bill, he calls you 30, 40 times a day, incessantly. Mm-hmm. He never has anything to say other than, "So what's up?" This can be annoying when you're trying to work. And Sam would get angrier and angrier if you wouldn't take his call, because at a certain point, I just let it roll over to voicemail, figure I'll call him in the end of the evening. One Friday night, I was trying to get him off the phone, endlessly get him off the phone. And he said to me, "Do you have any plans for the weekend?" And I said, "I think I'll fly to London and have dinner with Assange." The Washington Post misquotes that line. It's a joke. It's shtick. It's a throwaway line. And I hung up. My passport airline records, custom records, the security cameras at the Ecuadorian embassy would all show that no such meeting took place. The airline tickets, the hotel bill, and the receipt at Izzy's Deli on Santa Monica will prove that I was in London. I was in Los Angeles that day.
I've been to that deli.
Here is the one piece that's true in this whole story. I did stay in the London hotel in Los Angeles.
I have to say, though, that sounds like a phone call. There was an email you sent to him that said, I'm having dinner with my pal Hassan.
So
Right.
I realize that Sam has taken the bait, that he doesn't understand he's the butt of a joke. So I milk the joke in an email. Does what matters what you do or what you say? I didn't say it to anybody else. I was saying it to him to originally as a throwaway line, and then to my shock, he actually believed it.
Yeah.
Now, the evidence shows evidence. So the evidence shows otherwise. So where does that take us?
Well,
nowhere.
My follow-up question, if I were the special counsel, would be, okay, you didn't go to London. Could you have met him on Skype?
They did. That question was raised. Skype, that of course would leave a record.
Yeah.
And there is no such record because there was no such conversation. While we're at it, I didn't talk to him on the phone either. No, I've never spoken to him, met with the guy, so on.
You have not actually met with him?
No, never met him in my life.
Your communication was through an intermediary, right?
Correct. Because he went on CNN in June, and he said he had this treasure trove of documents on Hillary. Before I wrote on that, my column, or went on my show and said it, I wanted to know that it was true.
Yeah.
And I asked a local radio host who I knew was friendly with one of Assange's lawyers. So when he says, well, I hadn't even met Assange yet, therefore Stone's story is not possible. No, you were up his lawyer's derriere. So, and he came back to me and simply said, this guy's really got the goods. It's going to rock the race. And I said, when will it be? And he said, October. And it did. And it did.
Yeah. Well, you made a couple of predictions along the way, which were either incredibly prescient or lucky, I guess.
I made a few predictions that turned out to be completely wrong. Because you work your sources in my business. First of all, I'm doing a show 5 days a week. You know what that's like. And I'm a political animal. I want to know what's going on. So, for example, James Rosen of Fox wrote a memo to Judge Andrew Napolitano at Fox saying that his sources told him the disclosures would regard the Clinton Foundation. Somebody gave me a copy of that email, somebody I know through politics. Therefore, in my speech, I say the emails will be about the foundation. Turns out to be incorrect. But nothing I said would indicate advanced knowledge unless you want to twist my words. The most famous one, I said, the Podestas. The word "the" disappears from almost every media report. It's not even in the House Intelligence Committee report. The Podestas refers to John Antony because I had read the Panama paper disclosures on their Russian business that was public information in April of 2016. And I'd seen it again in an opposition research memo. This is all public information. Their time in the barrel, these matters would be publicized. And they were. Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Associated Press. Very simple. Find me the words where I said John Podesta's email will be hacked and you will have the information soon. I never said anything of the kind.
Well, if it comes to the fact, if you're called before the grand jury, right?
Yes.
You will be able to testify honestly and not have a problem.
I testified completely and honestly before the House Intelligence Committee. And
you didn't answer some of the questions, right?
That's not true. I answered every question but one. Okay. They wanted the name of my confirming source.
Right.
And I ultimately gave it to them. Trey Gowdy, the congressman, appealed to me. And the reason that I protected him, or wanted to, is because I feared that if his name leaked, he worked at a progressive radio station and there'd be professional reprisal. P.S. When his name leaked, he was fired by WBAI.
Yeah.
I rest my case. And I did provide his name and all of the relevant documents. So the assertion by Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell that I didn't answer every question is false. But they get to hide behind congressional immunity and say anything they want. When Senator Mark Warner says, Roger Stone works for the Kremlin, we know that. If he wasn't a U.S. Senator, I could sue him and I would win. I've never been to Russia. I've never had a Russian client. I've never worked for the Kremlin. It's a smear. But he's allowed to smear you because of his congressional immunity.
Would you be shocked if you were indicted?
Yes, because I've committed no crime. I sleep fine at night. These email-based reports that I'm panicky or hysterical are nonsensical. I know the facts. I understand how people try to recycle all of this stuff ad nauseum. The Russians hacked the DNC. Sorry, unproven. We don't know that. The DNC never let the FBI examine their servers. That is their claim. The intelligence services say Guccifer 2.0 is a Russian asset.
Right.
They do.
Mm-hmm.
James Clapper, for example, he says it. He also said there was no metadata collection program on Americans until Edward Snowden said he was lying. They also told us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. John Brennan, this psychopath who's the former CIA director, caught spying on a Senate committee investigating torture by the CIA. Those are the men that we're supposed to believe. Sadly, our intelligence agencies have been politicized. They favored the election of the status quo, the Clinton-Bush combine, the neocons, who've driven us to war and bankruptcy. And Donald Trump was not in their plans. So when the intelligence agencies say it is our assessment, or when the Daily Beast reports a source said, I call BS. Let's see the evidence and the proof. I've examined the question of Guccifer 2.0. I've written extensively on it. You can go to my site. There's more forensic evidence that he's not a Russian than that he is, but it's meaningless because my so-called communications with him is over Twitter, and it's 24 words, and it's ex post facto. It happened 6 weeks after WikiLeaks has already published the documents that I'm accused of colluding with him to hack. And I have no other communications with him in any form. So based on content, context, and timing, it's a canard, but it still gets recycled because it gives you the headline. Well, Trump associate in contact with Russian hacker. Mm-hmm. Nice headline.
Well, there are people who believe that Guccifer is a Russian. Let's
you're entitled to believe it, right? But unproven at a minimum.
Okay. All right. So you would be surprised if you were indicted, right? You'd be really shocked.
Yes, I would be. I would be surprised because I have committed no crime.
Not fearful either.
Well, let's be clear. Can the government, with their awesome power, manufacture a crime when there is none? Of course. I would certainly hope that that doesn't happen. But in connection with Russian collusion or anything having to do with the 2016 election, absolutely not.
Well, in your book, you say pretty strongly that the Russian collusion story is a hoax.
I believe it is.
Now, the intelligence services certainly believe they interfered. Do you dismiss that? Now, forget the collusion, just the interference.
Yes, I think there's probably ham-handed attempts to interfere. We, of course, financed the election of Boris Yeltsin in Russia. We interfere in foreign elections all the time. We just interfered in the Israeli election using taxpayer dollars to try to topple Netanyahu. So let's not kid ourselves here. However, if you examine the whole Russian troll phenomena and try to understand their badly written messaging, at some points they're pro-Trump, at other points they're anti-Trump, at some points they're pro-Bernie Sanders, at other points they're pro-Hillary, they're anti-Hillary. Most of their money is spent after the election. I think Boris and Ivan had to tell the boss back in Moscow they were doing something. They spent at dollar levels that, given the magnitude of the spending in a presidential campaign, are ineffectual. They didn't move anybody. And their messaging is so muddled and inconsistent, it's hard to say what they're trying to communicate. So did they do something? Yes.
You just don't think it was effective?
I don't think it was effective. This is something Mueller has identified this. They've been indicted. None of them are coming here for trial. Gets him a great headline. One of the people he indicted was a Russian caterer. So in this case, he has, in fact, indicted a ham sandwich.
The Russian caterer is a billionaire, I think.
It's a joke.
Yes, of course. It's a joke. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the things in your book, okay?
Sure.
So you obviously have had many, many interactions with politicians along the way, and you have come to form certain opinions about what can be done effectively and what politicians should and shouldn't do, right? Do you feel like a politician who is honest is making a mistake if that's what he sticks to?
In other words,
in other words, you made the point about McCain.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, perfect example.
Right? So he would have made a mistake if he said, I'm still against that wall.
Well, except for you have to believe in something.
Yeah.
We elect people to stick to their principles even when they're unpopular. the speechwriters around Ronald Reagan tried to tell him, don't call it an evil empire. Don't say Mr. Gorbachev. Don't say that, Mr. President. It's too provocative. It's too Cold War. But he did it anyway.
God knows they try to tell Trump not to say a lot of things.
Yeah, but you can't tell him anything. He's the master of his own fate. He's not. Just because Karl Rove ran George W. Bush doesn't mean that there's some man behind the curtain running Donald Trump. Donald Trump is his own man, does what he wants.
You called that, I should have mentioned that hoax, you put it in the context of the big lie.
Yes.
Right? There's a lot of big lies that have gone down here.
The Russians colluded with the Trump campaign. There's the biggest.
Of the century.
The biggest
lie of the century.
So far, it's, in terms of media column inches, I'd say that's defensible.
People would say it was a big lie to say Obama was not an American, born an American. People would say that was a very big lie.
You're entitled to say that. I didn't happen to agree with that assertion by Trump, but no one tells him what to say and do.
And 3 million people voted illegally.
Yeah, it could be closer to 4.
Okay. Well, now you're famous for making what other people would say.
If you want to do a whole program on illegal voting, I'd be happy to come here and go toe-to-toe with you.
People. Okay. There are a lot of stories you've written books on subjects that other people would say are outre, let's say, points, right? LBJ killed JFK.
On the basis of motive, means, and opportunity, eyewitness evidence, fingerprint evidence, and a better understanding of deep Texas politics, yes. That book's a New York Times bestseller, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. I'm not an attorney. You read it and tell me whether I make a compelling case.
The Clintons were responsible for JFK Jr. dying.
I've not written such a book. It was reported by Media Matters America that I was writing such a book, but why would we believe them?
Okay, so
I've not published such a book.
You don't have that opinion.
I believe he was murdered. The focus of my research, because I've thought about doing a book on this, is solely on the plane crash to try to determine whether it was indeed an accident. 80% of a book I might write about this pertains to whether he was murdered. 20% would be speculation about who would have an interest in him killed. Do I have proof that the Clintons killed John F. Kennedy Jr.? No, I do not. Do I know that when Hillary Clinton met with a major Democratic county chairman upstate, who I have an affidavit from, and she said, I want your support for the U.S. Senate, and he said, well, I like you, Mrs. Clinton, but I'm waiting for John Kennedy. She said, that problem will soon take care of itself. Did that happen? Yes. Is it noteworthy? Yes. Does it prove anything? No, but it's interesting.
The Bush family wanted to kill Reagan.
There's a great deal of evidence tying the Bush family to John Hinckley. The report from the attempted assassination of Reagan has never been released. The photos are very carefully cropped. To conceal what I believe is a very clearly identifiable second shooter. Judy Woodruff and at least one other newscaster, maybe Andrea Mitchell, I'd have to go back and look, report the second man because they've seen him. Those have disappeared from YouTube, but they exist. The struggle over the football between the Bush and Trump staffs is immediate, which is interesting. Yeah, I think it is highly probable George Bush's association with the CIA, demonstrably, based on records published in the book, starts far earlier than
when he was a CIA chief.
Right. It goes all the way back to the 60s. I know that Americans find the idea of political assassination difficult to swallow and coup d'etat. Europeans, not the case. In the case of Lyndon Johnson, he was facing criminal indictment in the Bobby Baker and Billy Saul Estes cases. Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, was telling people he was off the ticket and going to jail. There was only one way out. Who controlled the Dallas police? Who controlled the Dallas District Attorney and the Dallas County Sheriff's Office? Murder in Texas in 1963 is not a federal crime. It's a state crime with the locals having entire control of the investigation.
Well, I just lay those out because you have had a reputation for what other people would say is conspiracy theories.
Right.
Right?
One man's conspiracy theorist is another man's truth teller.
Okay. Well, I want to get to one thing because one thing I admired you saying in the book very much is that you do not approve of racism, that you think a Republican who is not a strong advocate of civil rights has no interest to me.
Yes.
You have had a record of saying some rather what I would consider racial comments about some people, and got you banned from CNN for calling someone a fat Negro.
Gee, wasn't I on?
I know you came back. I saw you.
That ban didn't last very long.
I saw you.
But to be clear, I did, in an intemperate tweet, call Roland Martin a fat Negro.
Yes.
I also publicly apologized in a column, which I syndicated around the country. Yeah, I make mistakes, but I work for the president that gave us affirmative action. I work for the president who desegregated the public schools. I work for the president who increased civil rights enforcement funding at the Justice Department tenfold. I work for the president who started the Minority Business Enterprise Office. And now I support the president who's brought black unemployment to the lowest point in American history.
But it's still not great to call someone Mandingo.
That's true. That's just why, well, that one I think
Herbert and Herman Cain.
I think, look, there is a little bit of that is acting, is a little bit of showbiz. But I think I have apologized for things I've said that are, in this regard, that are offensive. I didn't realize how offensive they were. I consulted Al Sharpton, who's a very good friend of mine, and he said, you ought to just apologize. We're Christians, apologize. And I did.
Trump doesn't believe in that. But anyway.
So you're a Trump supporter, huh?
No, I happen to know I know him.
He never apologizes.
I used to spend time with him. He was jealous of my hair. But
I'm jealous of your hair.
But so you've also made comments about some women I know.
Yes.
And
yes.
They're kind of nasty.
Criticizing a woman does not make you a misogynist. It means you criticize a specific person.
But using the C word, using the B word.
Sometimes there are words that so perfectly describe something or someone that they must be used. Sorry.
So you're okay with that?
We're talking about Anna Navarro, and I stand by everything I have ever said. She is a vile human being. I just say what others are thinking.
But that's okay. But you always called her sort of a bean eater, which
I've never once called her a bean eater.
No, she likes her rice and beans.
I never said. Well, that refers to her weight. I fat shamed her.
You fat shamed her. Okay. So I want to make two other comments. One is that you're talking in high praise of pizza, which I agree with 100%. And the other thing is wear cowboy hats.
You know, I
agree with that percent too, because I was born in Brooklyn. But Ronald Reagan wore cowboy hats.
Yes. So if you're from west of the Mississippi, you can get away with a cowboy hat.
He was from Ohio.
Well, he was born in Ohio,
yes.
But he was the governor of California. So when you're the governor of California or Nevada, the governor of Nevada can get away with cowboy boots and a hat. In California, you can get away with a cowboy hat. You can also get away with it in Texas. Lyndon Johnson wore one. In all honesty, I think they're so cool that I occasionally wear one, but if I'm in Texas, I would not wear one in Manhattan. You look like a hick.
Okay.
And pizza speaks for itself. I mean, pizza is like sex. Even when it's bad, still pretty good.
Do you talk to Trump at all?
From time to time.
And how's he doing?
He's doing great.
He's not worried about all this?
Well, we haven't talked specifically about this, just like we never talked about WikiLeaks and the WikiLeaks disclosures. Just never discussed it.
Have you mentioned pardon to him?
No. Pardon for whom?
You.
I don't need a pardon. I'm not charged with any crime. I would say that I don't answer hypothetical questions, and I think he should pardon Mike Flynn. Absolutely.
And what about Cohen?
Well, Cohen hasn't been charged with a crime.
Right. Well, stay tuned, I guess.
We shall see.
The book is called Stone's Rules. This is Roger Stone. Thank you for coming.